Good morning, students. In the last class, we concluded with this five propositions which discusses the nature of narratives. It was done by Andrew Bennett and Nicholas Royal. It says that stories are everywhere. Second, not only do we tell stories, but stories tell us. Next, telling of stories always bound up with power, property, and domination. Stories are multiple, always more than one story. Last, stories always have something to tell us about stories themselves. It speaks of themselves. It is known as a kind of a self-reflection and metafictional dimensions of story. Now we move to the next part, the distinction between a story and narrative. It is often treated as synonyms. Both are considered as similar concepts, but it is distinct. There is some kind of difference between both these concepts. Story is something which is an unformulated concept which consists of events to be depicted. You have a set of events which is still unformulated. And narrative is that process of structuration which goes into this events, structuration within the language. And all narratives move in a linear fashion from beginning point to the end, to the conclusion. And it is just a sequence of events which moves till the end. So story is something which is unformulated, which is kind of a skeleton where you get all those pieces of events which is to be depicted. And narrative is showing or telling of these events with some kind of modes of expression. That implies that there is some kind of structuration happening within narrative. Usually, there is an example for the distinction between story and plot. King died, queen died. That is a story. King died, queen died of grief. That is actually a plot. That is actually a narrative. So the first one, it is two incidents. King died, queen died. When it becomes narrative, when it becomes a plot, it gets packaged, it becomes ordered, and it takes a structure, and there is a linear manner. So this is the basic distinction between story and narrative. And coming to culture and narrative, you know that in an ancient period, narratives are the ways we keep or we preserve our past. We all know all those ballads, oral narratives by which we preserved our rich past. These narratives preserved history, our customs, our rules, our mores, social mores, So, narratives is a kind of an important element in all cultures. It talked about life, existence of human beings within that social framework. Society, its culture, its history, his, its customs, everything got preserved in these narratives. Ethnicity was protected and preserved, which was handed down in the form of folklores and songs. We have a lot of them. One example will be this Vadakan Vattal. So these oral forms of narrative structure preserved our thoughts, our customs, everything into permanence. You know that writing was a craft which came later. First, it was oral forms of narrative, and writing was one which preserved in the form of letters. So, this is about culture and narrative. Now comes myth and narratives. You know that this storytelling is a basic human activity. That is why when you ask a child, what do you want? What do you like to hear? He or she will naturally say, I like to hear a story. And the storytelling process is some kind of a natural activity for us. We need and use stories to describe and explain human beings, human conditions, and also to describe the universe we inhabit. So we have all those grand narratives, all those master narratives from these Greco Roman narratives, Greco Roman myths, Christian myths, all those secular scientific, and these all narratives assign meaning, help us understand ourselves, help us understand our meaning of existence. It is said that throughout human history, all these myths, sacred or otherwise, all those significant myths have unified societies and cultures. All these myths reveal how we understand our own existence, human conditions. These myths teach us or inculcate in us all those worldviews. So, this theorist, Claude Lévi-Strauss, used structural approach to understand myths. So he looked into the deeper structure of a myth and he understood that myth, every myth is not a kind of an individual story. There is something like a similar structure in all these different myths, in all these different narratives. They had this similar thread in these different narratives. And Strauss tried to identify that universal mental principles embedded in these myths. He said that, he argued that myths are made of mythines. Themes is the fundamental element of a myth. So he identified various key events, actions, relationships within the myths, which is similar in all these myths around the world. They have a similar structure, a similar pattern. Various elements repeat. They have, he identified a pattern in all these myths. So, in all these myths, myth themes are actually rearranged and presented. So, he takes the example of Oedipus myth. He says that highlights myth themes in Oedipus killing his father. And he says that these kinds of elements, these kinds of themes are present in different narratives and different myths all over the world. So, myth themes or fundamental elements are present in all myths we come across. That is this idea. Now, talking about narrative and identity, it says that the existence of ourself, it is constructed by these texts and narratives. There is the social circumstances which give meaning to our existence. നമ്മൾ ജീവിക്കുന്ന സാഹചര്യങ്ങളാണ് നമ്മളുടെ സെൽഫിന് ഒരു എക്സിസ്റ്റൻസ് കൊടുക്കുന്നത്. ആ സോഷ്യൽ സർക്കംസ്റ്റൻസസിനെ കൺസ്ട്രക്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നത് it is all those text and narratives. So narratives they have an important role in identity formation. We have all those oral narratives, as said earlier. So they actually serve a mnemonic purpose. Mnemonic purpose is actually you find a pattern which helps to recall it quickly. നിമോണിക് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ അതിനൊരു പാറ്റേൺ ഉണ്ടാവും. വടക്കൻ പാട്ടുകളിൽ അതൊരു പാറ്റേൺ ഉണ്ടാവും പാടുന്നത്. അതായത് നമ്മൾ ഓർത്തിരിക്കാം എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിലുള്ള ആ ഒരു ഇതിലായിരിക്കും അതിന്റെ കൺസ്ട്രക്ഷൻ പോകുന്നത്. It will be structured like that. So it means that memories are embodied in these narratives. These narratives enabled to preserve the history of a society, and this component of memory which is embedded in this narrative helped, contributed to the formation of a self-image. ഈ പറയുന്ന നറേറ്റീവിൽ ഇരിക്കുന്ന ആ ഒരു മെമ്മറിയിൽ കൂടെയാണ് നറേറ്റീവ്സ് ജീവിക്കുന്നത്. അതിൽ കൂടെയാണ് നമ്മൾ എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്, സെൽഫ് എന്ന് പറയുന്നതിനെ നമ്മൾ കൺസ്ട്രക്ട് ചെയ്യുന്നത്, സ്ട്രക്ചർ ചെയ്യുന്നത്. സോ ഇറ്റ് മെയിൻറ്റെയിൻ എ സെൽഫ് ഇമേജ് ഓഫ് എ സൊസൈറ്റി. So we have these Greek epics. Homer has written Iliad and Odyssey. These are oral narratives, and it actually preserved the culture, the social mores, customs, and rules of that time. So that is why the rediscovery of Greek civilization came to be regarded as first and best of all traditions. These oral narratives preserved the cultural continuity. They recorded all those customs, rules, social mores of those times. And also, narratives create identity by merging fact and fiction. These works, these oral narratives contain fact and fiction, and thereby it construct the identity of self. So these are the major points in this class. Please refer your textbooks. I will be providing additional notes too. Thank you. Have a nice day.